Which page are we talking about?
We are Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. We're continuing on the review of the fourth chapter of Megillah, and we're up to the part where we're quoting a section from the Mishnah, which said that the law that we made with regards to not using the proceeds that comes from the sale of a sacred object for anything else. So the Mishnah had stated that the same is true for any of the leftover of the proceeds, which means if you sell a synagogue, right, and you make a lot of money off the sale of a synagogue, and then you went and you bought something which is of higher kedusha with the money, but then there was a lot of money left over, right? The Mishnah says, just like you cannot use the money from the sale for anything less holy, the same applies with the money left over from after this purchase of this other item, which is of a greater sanctity. That leftover money, the same rule applies to that money. You cannot just use that money for anything else. So now comes along the Gemara. Again, we're 27a3 in the art scrolls, right? On the right column. So now says, so the Gemara says like this, says Rava comes along and he qualifies the ruling of the Mishnah. And he says that when the Mishnah says that you cannot use the proceeds, this is only when we're talking about a sale, right? Which means the money that you have is money that are proceeds from the sale of a shul. However, Rava says, if there's leftover money from a collection that's made, not a sale, but a collection that's made. So you go around town and you tell people, we want to build a synagogue, right, for example, and people give that money, and you would assume that the money that has been collected has now a certain level of sanctity because it's dedicated for the use of a shul. Nevertheless, Rava says that no, once you've purchase the shul, if there's leftover money, you can use that money for anything you want. It doesn't have to be from something of equal or higher value in kedusha than the synagogue for which you collected the money. Okay, everybody understand the point? Yeah. Okay.
So that means that if you were to buy a Sefer Torah and
right,
you were able to pay it off, and you had extra money, you could use the money for anything else.
That's correct. That's what Rava is saying. Now, Abaya has a problem with what Rava is saying. Abaya comes along and says that I have a brisa which seems to fly in the face of what you, Rava, are saying. And you have to follow the reasoning over here. Follow the logic, okay? The brisa which explains our Mishnah, the brisa says that when we say that the proceeds must be used only to purchase items of greater sanctity, this was only when they did not stipulate at the time of the sale, right, that they wanted to use the proceeds for something else. However, if they did make such a stipulation, right, then you could use the proceeds even to hire a dechsusia, which the Gemara will later explain. It's the town courier. You could use it even for something like a town courier to pay the town courier, which means even if it's not something that's holy, you can use it. Now, follow the logic. Now, what's the brisa talking about? If you're going to say the brisa is talking about when it says that so long as you did not make a stipulation, then you cannot use the proceeds, the leftover proceeds. However, if you did make a stipulation, then you can use it. Obviously, it cannot be talking about a situation where you made a stipulation with regards to the proceeds of the sale of a shul, because the Mishnah already stated emphatically that you cannot use the proceeds of the sale of a shul for anything but something of a greater kedusha. And likewise, that applies with the things that are left over. The leftover funds after you've already bought this object of greater kedusha, the leftover funds, right? Also, the Mishnah says emphatically and clearly that you cannot use it. So when the Brisa asks, where are these words of the Mishnah being spoken of? Only in a case where you make a stipulation, but where you didn't make a stipulation. Where you didn't make a stipulation. However, when you did make a stipulation, then you can use that money. What's it talking about? Not the part of the Mishnah that's talking about the sale or the leftover money from the sale, but rather it's talking about the next part of the Mishnah, rather it's talking about with regards to money that was collected for the purpose of making a synagogue. And with regards to that, the Brisa is telling me that only when you make a stipulation, when you collect the funds, right, then you can use the leftover money that you've collected. But if you didn't make a stipulation, right, while you were collecting the funds, that the money was going to be left over, you could use for something else, then you cannot use it. So now that Abaya has tried to establish that the Brisa is talking about a case where you've collected money and you made a stipulation, then you can use the extra leftover money. If you didn't make a stipulation, you cannot use it. This serves as a challenge to Rava, who made a statement that a blanket rule about using leftover proceeds from money that you collected, right? In other words, he's saying, Abai is saying, you, Rav, are telling me that in all cases you can use the leftover money from a collection for whatever you want. But this Brisa, which says that there needs to be a stipulation, I understand that to mean that is talking about in the case when you collected money. So if that's the case, this Brisa contradicts you. If the true interpretation of the Brisa is that it's talking about a case when you collected money, so how can you, Rava, say that in all cases you can use the leftover of the money that was collected for anything you want, when this Brisa seems to be saying that there has to be a condition, made at the time of the collection. So the Gemara says that one second. The Gemara rejects Abaya's interpretation and says that really the Brisa must be referring to where they sold a object of Kedusha, like a shul or something, and the Brisa is talking about the money left over. And so this is what the Brisa means to say. And now the Gemara is clarifying for us what the Brisa is saying. It adds a particular detail into the circumstances that makes it all clear. What's the circumstances? Saying like this. We're talking about a case where they had a shul, and this shul was built by the community. And now they decided that they want to sell the shul. So we say that when do we say that you can use the leftover money? You can use the let me repeat that. When do we say you cannot use the leftover proceeds from the sale for something that is not Kedusha? That's only in a case where the sale took place without the 7 trustees, right? And without them making a stipulation in the presence of the townspeople. However, if you were to have a case where there was a sale that was about to take place of a shul, and there was a stipulation made by the 7 trustees of the town in front of all the people of the town, right? And the stipulation was that the proceeds of the sale of the shul may be used for other things, then, right, it's permissible to use the funds even to hire a town courier, right? So that's how we understand the Brisa. And therefore, when Rava comes along and he makes a distinction between the statement of the Mishnah, which says that the leftover proceeds of a shul cannot be used for anything else, right? That's when it's a sale. But Rava says if it's a time when they make a collection, that collection is fine. That collection, even without making a stipulation, if there was leftover money, the leftover money can be used for profane things that are not associated with Kedusha. So that's all fine and good. So now the Gemara says, what's a Dechsusia? So the Gemara tells us that Abaya asked a certain scholar who used to recite brises in front of Rav Sheshes, right? Sometimes you have people who are asked to come and, zugepus, say something. And then you'd say something, and when you'd say it, then the teacher would comment on what you said, right? I know that, I try to do this when I'm called to a yeshiva, right? And I'm asked to speak to the boys, right? So the first thing I do is I say, tell me what you're learning. When I know what you're learning and you comment on that, so then I can elaborate on it and offer, further insights. So it seems that this guy, his job was, he was a scholar, not his job, but like his role was, he was asked to recite brises in front of Reb Sheshes. So Abaya came to this rabbi, came to this scholar, and said to him, look, you go and recite these brises in front of Reb Sheshes. Did you by any chance hear from Reb Sheshes what a dechsusia is, right? Well, because it says in the brise over here, right, that if you had a stipulation to use the money for anything else, you could use it even for a dechsusia. So maybe you heard from Reb Sheshes what a dechsusia is. So he said, yes, I did, actually. A dechsusia, this is the town kuria. That's what a dechsusia is. Says Abaya, that from here, we learn that if you ever have a young scholar who's trying to find the definition for a word that he doesn't know, he should ask it in front of somebody who frequents the presence of the rabbis, because it's not possible that this person who's in the presence of rabbis has not heard definitions of a lot of things. And so therefore, in all likelihood, he would know the definition of the word that you're looking for the translation or the definition of. Okay, so now it seems to be completely unrelated to anything that comes prior. This is like a new discussion, completely new discussion, okay? Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Remeah, what happens if you have people, like a group, that go from one town to another town, okay? The neighboring town, let's say. They go to the neighboring town, and while they're there, right, all of a sudden, the townspeople have levied a tax, a charity tax, on everybody that's there. Because, for whatever the reason is, they need to have funds to contribute to the poor people or to some of the needs of the people of the city. So what are they supposed to do? So Remeah says what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to give the money, right? Because when they come to you and they say, look, you're here in town, give the money. You're supposed to give the money. And then when you're ready to leave, you can go over back to the officials and you say, listen, give us back the money that we gave you for charity, and we're going to use that charity to distribute to the poor people of our town, right? Why should our money go to support the people of your town? There's a principle, the poor people of your town come first. So yes, there's this concept of al-tifresh min hatzibur, right? One should not separate themselves from the community. If everybody is joining together to do a mitzvah, you shouldn't say, well, I'm not going to do it. You should do it even if you're not from that town. However, Remeah says, when it comes time to leave, you can go and ask them for the money back and take that money. You can't put it back into your pocket and put it back into your account, right? But rather, you take that money and you use those funds to support the poor people of your own town. So now, the Gemara brings a brisa which supports this rule. It says that if people of one town went to another town and the town officials taxed them for charity, then they should give it. But when they return home, they can get refunded the money and then take it back with them. Obviously, as we said before, this is in order for them to distribute to the poor people of their city. However, here the brisa comes along and says that this is only true for the group, if you have a group of people. But if you're an individual, and I think what this means is, so long as it's less than 10, 10 is considered a group. But if it's less than 10, anything's less than a 10, then if you gave the money to charity in that town, then your money should be given for the poor of that town and remains with the people of that town. Now, the Gemara comes along and brings a story, an incident, which seems to qualify this principle that any time you go to another town as a group and you give the money to the townspeople as part of the charity campaign, and then when you're ready to leave, you get the money back. That's not in every case. And we're going to see here a story where it shows that this is not the case. What's the story? Rav Huna. So Rav Huna was the leader of his area, and there must have been a number of people in that town on that day, right? So he decreed a fast, right? He decreed a fast. Now, usually what would happen is, the next tractate we're going to be learning is Maseches Tainus. So there's a big discussion over there about when they would decree for a fast day, and when the community was suffering from a drought, that's when they would make a fast day. It's not like today, right? You go to the supermarket and you buy your food. Back in those days, it was, everybody was very intimately involved with the agriculture and with the plowing and the sowing and the watering, etc. And one of the main factors for the produce of that year is rain. And if there's no rain, if there's a drought, it's a terrible, terrible thing. And Jewish people were instructed to recognize that when things of this nature, when natural disasters happen, it's not happenstance, it's not just by chance, but this is something that is as a result of a decree from heaven. If that's the case, sometimes it's due to our behavior that brings on something like a drought. And what are we supposed to do? Well, what we do is we create a fast day for us to repent and have introspection and change our ways to be able to avert this decree and have rain fall. So this is what happened. Came to town, Rav Huna decreed a fast, and then because of the fast that Rav Huna decreed, what happened was Rav Chana ben Chanilai and all of the people of his town, they came to Rav Huna, to the town of Rav Huna, to participate in the fast, right? I guess it was a regional fast. So they were part of the region, so they came, even though a different town, but in the same region they came. So now, when the officials of Rav Huna's city made a tax, right, meaning a charity tax to everybody, they levied a charity tax on these people as well. So what did Rav Chana and all his people do? They gave the money. Now, when they were ready to leave, right, they came to Rav Huna and they said, "No, let the master give us back the funds, and we will use the money to support the people of our town with this money." So Rav Huna responded to them, "You're not getting your money back." Why? So he explains to them, he says like this. So we've learned in a Brisa that when do we say that people who contribute, a big group that comes to a town, when they contribute the money to the charity campaign, that they get the money back? We said this when there's no major rabbi, when there's no town scholar that is involved in the communal affairs. But when there is a chaver, a respectable rabbi who's involved in the communal affairs over there, then the contribution should be given to the town scholar, and what happens is he ends up distributing it as he sees fit. So says Rav Huna, I'm that scholar. I am the guy who is involved in the public affairs over here. So when you gave the money, right, it's now for me to decide to distribute it how I fit, how I see fit, right? And even though you are not from this town, but nevertheless, the whole ruling about getting your money back is when the community would create a tax when there was no Talmud Chacham involved, where it was just the townspeople. But since I am involved, you don't get the money back. And he says that's not the only reason. There's a further reason why. How much more so, he says, that this case applies here because, remember, you guys are living in the same region as I am. My poor and your poor all depend on me for charity. In other words, Rav Huna's campaign to collect funds to support people who need funds for food and clothing and everything else wasn't only for his own town, but it was for the entire region. And so Rav Huna is telling Rav Chana, I am the one who supports the people of your town as well. So when you contribute money to a charity campaign that is made in my town, right? the principle of getting the money back and then feeding your poor people with it does not apply for these two reasons. Number one, I'm a Torah scholar and I'm involved in the communal affairs. And number two, the people of your town come to me anyway for assistance with funds. So therefore, the money stays by me.
Question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Okay, this assumes that the towns are close and the poor of one town can go to the other town to do that.
Yes.
But if I'm a poor person, if I'm spending my time trying to make a living, I may not have the time to go over to the Rav of the next town to try and get tzedakah. So I mean, I would have asked the question as the Rav of that town, do you have something to prove that that's what's happening? Because my people are so busy, it's a poor town, it's so busy trying to make a living that they're not going to travel whatever it is an hour to come to your town and get funds.
So I'll say it like this. You have to hone in on what is the discussion here. What's the question and what's the answer? We're talking over here about halacha, right? So we want to have the strict understanding of the halacha being said over here. So what's the halacha? We're saying that if you come to another town and they levy a tax on you, but you guys are a group, the halacha is you can come and demand your money back to go and use that money to support the poor of your town. Why did you have to give the money to begin with? The reason why you had to give the money to begin with is because you shouldn't separate yourself from everybody else. When you are given a request to contribute to a charity campaign that is taking place on a fast day, you should never separate yourself from such a campaign. You should always give. What about the actual funds? Am I obligated to give from my funds to support the poor of that city that I'm visiting or not? So the answer is it really depends. If you're an individual, we say that yes, you do. You're here as an individual. You're here visiting this city as an individual, but you're joining into a communal event, and therefore you have to contribute. And the bit of money that you give, it's okay that you can contribute to supporting the poor people of that town for that day, for the fast day. We're not saying that you have to give all your funds to support the poor. You have to give a contribution. So that's fine. However, the ruling is, if you came as a group, right, then the halacha is you have a right to demand your money back, and not just they can give you the money back. They have to give you the money back. That's the halacha. The halacha is they have to give you the money back. So now the Gemara is establishing that there's an exception to that ruling. When can you come along with a rightful demand to get your money back? Only when the collection was made by the community without the rabbi being involved in the communal affairs. But if the rabbi is involved in the communal affairs, then your concern about the money being distributed properly, which you would argue and say, I'm going to certainly distribute it properly because I'm going to make sure that the people in my town get what they need. You guys, I'm not sure what you're going to do with the money. When there's a rabbi involved in the communal affairs, we say that you'll be rest assured that the tzedakah that you gave is going to be used to tzedakah, and it's going to be used to provide other people. In that case, to the right places, right? In that case, the ruling is that even if you lived far, far, far away from that town, the money that you contributed on that fast day or for that charity campaign, it's never yours to claim back, because there's a rabbi involved in the affairs, and he is going to make sure that it goes to charity. That doesn't mean you have to give all your charity money that you've set aside for a whole year. It means any contribution that you made while you were in the city, it stays in that city. Now, Rav Huna came along and added an additional consideration beyond that halacha to say, And even though I have every right to keep the money, even if I wasn't supporting anybody from your town, there's an additional factor over here to take into consideration for you guys to kind of feel easier. Know that there are people from your town that come to me and ask me for funding, and I give them funding. So don't worry, some of the funds is going to come back to your town anyway. But halachically, even if they weren't coming to him for funding, he was not obligated to give it back to them, because the collection of charity that's made in a particular town it applies to everybody that's in the town on the day that everybody is that anybody is there. On the day that they're collecting, everybody has to contribute. Why? I didn't see this inside, but I'm like, it makes most sense to me, because there's al tifresh min hatzibur. You're not allowed to separate yourself from the tzibur, so that's why you have to give it. So that's how I understand it. I just want to see something. 1 second. Uh-huh. 1 second. Just 1 second. 1 second. Okay, so Rashi says the reason why they have to give is because you don't want people to suspect them of not paying, not giving charity. In other words, if people see that there's a group that came to town, right, and they're asked for tzedakah and they refuse, so people will assume that these are the kind of people who don't give tzedakah when they're asked for tzedakah. So it's kind of mar zayin, right? Mar zayin. How do you say mar zayin in English?
An evil eye.
Means people will suspect you incorrectly of doing something wrong.
Giving a wrong impression by sight.
Thank you. Yeah, so giving a wrong impression, right? It's like, I remember when I was a kid, when we needed a bathroom, so we were told, don't go into McDonald's to use the bathroom. Why? Because people will think that you're going in there to eat, right? You're not going in there to eat, right? You're only going there to use the bathroom. People don't know that, and they see a religious kid going into McDonald's. They might think, this kid, I guess, as a religious kid, he's got no problem eating in McDonald's. So therefore, better not to use their bathroom. Go somewhere else, right? That's an example of mar zayin, right? Where people see you behaving a certain way and not understanding why. So if you are asked to contribute to a particular collection, right, you should not refuse, right? Rather, you should give the money, and then you can later on go back and ask for the money back and distribute it in your own town. Anyway, so I don't know how we got here, but that's the end. That's the end of this. That's the end of this shtickle, right? That Rav Huna was showed that there is a certain exception to the rule that you could get your money back if you contributed it as a group. Usually, you can go and get your money back and distribute it among your own poor. But when there's a rabbi involved in the communal affairs, that's the exception, where you will not get your money back. The money will be distributed as the rabbi sees fit. Okay. Now is a good time to just mention that we're standing literally 3 days before Rosh Hashanah, and I know that there are rabbis of every community that collect money for tzorchei Chag, for the needs of the festival, whether it's for the needs for food for Rosh Hashanah, or whether it's people who have needs to be able to purchase arba minim, or to buy food for Yom Tov, for sukkahs, or to build a sukkah. So now is a good time before Rosh Hashanah. Contact your local rabbi and make your contribution and say, if there's any collection that's being made to help the poor people of the town to cover their expenses, I'd like to contribute something. And everybody should contribute, because even if you're a poor person, right, you should still make some contribution to help others with their expenses of Yom Tov. So that's now it's a good, once we're already mentioning it. So I'm mentioning it as it says that Torah is a very special thing because it brings you to do a good deed. So if we're learning about something, we have to make sure that what we're learning is not just theoretical, but it's also practical, that we take what we're learning and put it into practice. So that's that. Okay. Now, up to the next Mishnah on 27b, top of 27b. So the Mishnah says as follows, that the townspeople are not allowed to sell a public synagogue to an individual. We're talking about over here, if a guy comes along and says, I want to buy this synagogue off you as my own private synagogue. And what do I mean by my own private synagogue? I mean that I'm going to use it just for myself. No one else is allowed to use it. I'm not going to have a minion. I'm not going to have anything else. It's just for me. Then you're not allowed to sell it to him because it's going from being a synagogue for the public to a private synagogue, to a private chapel. Why? Why not? He says, because by doing this, you're demoting it from its level of holiness. These are the words of Rabbi Meir, right? Now, the Chachamim don't agree with Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim said to him, if that's the case, right, if you're going to say that you're not allowed to sell a synagogue that belongs to the public to a private individual, even though he's going to keep it as a place for prayer, but he's going to use it for himself, you're not allowed to because you're diminishing the holiness, then the same thing should be true with regards to selling a synagogue that belongs to a big city, a big town, to a small town, to a small city, right? So that's what the rabbis responded to Reb Meir. Upon which the Gemara comments that it seems that the Chachamim have a very good response to Reb Meir. What would Reb Meir answer to the Chachamim to such a charge? Saying, listen, how is it okay for us to sell a synagogue from a large city to a small city if you, Reb Meir, are saying that you're not allowed to sell it from a public to a private? To which Reb Meir responded, or the Gemara responds on behalf of Reb Meir, and says that, listen, with regards to a big city to a small city, right, there's a difference because the big city and the small city, they're both going to be using it for holiness. What do I mean by that? I mean, you still have Kaddish, you still have Kedusha, you still have the Kriyas HaTorah taking place. All these things are happening. Yes, it may be a smaller town, but the usage is going to be the same. It's still public usage, right? Whereas here, it's going from public usage to private usage, and therefore you're removing the extra kedusha that comes along with all the things that are done regularly by a minyan in a synagogue. So now the chas.
Rabbi,
yes,
it's such an obvious answer. I don't even understand why it's under discussion.
Which is what the Gemara now goes on to say. The Gemara says, what about you, rabbis? It seems that the distinction that Reb Meir makes is such an obvious, clear, straight, logical distinction. So how could you rabbis come along now with this, with trying to make a distinction, right? There seems, in other words, trying to compare the two, right? You can't compare the two, right? So to this, the Chachamim answer, and they say like this. There's an additional quality that is associated with having a large crowd come together to worship, to praise Hashem. And that is the principle of Barav Am Hadras Melech. With the multitude of people is the glory of the king. The more people that come together, the greater honor and glory you're giving to the king. So when you're going to sell from a big synagogue from a big city to a small city, and you don't concern yourself about the fact that you're diminishing what? That you're diminishing this multitude of people that are going to give honor to Hashem to becoming a small group of people, and you're not concerned about that, you still go ahead with the sale. Say the rabbis, if we're not going to be concerned with the principle of Barav Am Hadras Melech, right, which means that there is some diminishing, and nevertheless we're not concerned about it, so too, so long as you're not using it for a disrespectful use, so long as it's still being used as a chapel of sorts, right? It's still okay to sell it from a public synagogue to being used as a private for private usage. And that's how
I have a question, if I may.
Yep.
In my learnings, there are certain dynamics that I'm not familiar with. So I guess the question is, what is the appropriateness of having a private synagogue versus a public one? Because a private one would deny other people the ability to daven. So to me, it's the democracy with a small d of Judaism that people have entree to pray and to create a minyan. And all of a sudden, a private one diminishes their ability to pray and have collegial, friendships or whatever. That's the best way I can describe it. Okay.
So every town has to have at least two synagogues, one that I pray in and one that I don't pray in, right? So now, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Right.
You're
muted. One you'll never go to. Right.
That's right.
I got it. Right.
So now, let's say you have two synagogues, the one that I pray in and the one that I never pray in, right? Because I don't like these people and I don't like these people. And let's say, for example, right, somehow, a miracle, right? They make peace. They make peace. And they decide, you know what? Now that we've made peace, we're going to amalgamate and we're going to come together and we're going to have a much bigger Shabbos Kiddush, right? And if we all put in the, instead of using the resources, especially, let's just put it all collectively together and we'll just, instead of paying double electricity and so on and so forth, we'll just all come together in one synagogue. What are we going to do with this synagogue? So one guy says, you know what? I don't mind having this synagogue as my own private one on condition no one else can come and use it. This is going to be my chapel. I'll buy it. The answer is you can't sell it to him. Why can't you sell it to him? Because what you're doing right now is you're diminishing the Kedusha, right? So long as you keep it as communal property, maybe you're not going to use it every Shabbos for the community, but maybe the high holidays, when all the three day a year Jews come to shul, right? So then we need to have extra space. We'll use that synagogue. Well, once we sold it to this guy, that's not going to be possible. So therefore, what you're doing is you're diminishing the Kedusha. According to Rameh, you're diminishing the Kedusha. And therefore you're not allowed. According to the Chachamim, no, it is possible to sell it to an individual so long as he's not turning it into to something else that is disrespectful use. And we're not concerned about the diminishing of the Kedusha. Just like we're not concerned with the diminishing of the Kedusha by going from a big city to a small city, selling it from a big city to a small city. Yes.
Well, if we define it, diminishing of Kedusha, the translation is holiness Kedusha. So
right.
Therefore, it compromises the whole idea of having a private synagogue because it eliminates part of the value of it being a synagogue.
So the rabbis would say that they're not concerned about that because it's still being used for sacred purposes, although not communal.
Okay.
Rabbi, are the two cases similar? And the reason why I'm saying is that for a small town, the fact of the matter is, if you didn't have a place, you could probably daven anywhere. It's not a big deal. But here, what they're doing is they're providing a place for everyone to gather together and to pray. And so for them, it's Belov Hadat Melech, in the same way that it was in the big town. Whereas in the case of of selling it for a communal to a yachid, there's nothing there that's Belov Hadat Melech for the yachid. It's only him. So why are they? Shouldn't they have given an equivalent case to prove that Rabbi Meir was not correct?
So it seems that what the Chachamim are trying to say is the whole concern here is about the seller. Put the buyer on the side, right? Forget about who's buying it. The seller. Is the seller allowed to sell it if there's going to, as a result of that sale, cause a diminishing of kedusha or glorifying Hashem. So we're saying that when you're selling it from a big city to a small city, the people in the big city do not have to concern themselves with the fact that it's going to go from having 200 people show up to 20 people show up, even though it's not as honorable to Hashem when a synagogue has only 20 people instead of 200. We don't concern ourselves with this thing for the people selling it, and we say they could go ahead and sell it. So likewise, they say that if we're not going to be particular about what kind of usage the synagogue is going to have in terms of what holy thing takes place there, whether it's the tefillah of a yachid or a tefillah of a rabbin, right? It's true. You can't say Kedusha over there. It's true. You can't say Baruch Hu and read from the Torah in public when it's only an individual. But nevertheless, that's not to say that the individual praying in the synagogue isn't doing a holy act while he's praying. He is doing a holy act. Just it's in a diminished way because he's not doing it in a public setting. He's doing it in a private setting, but it's still Kedusha. You know, I'll tell you like this. There's a halacha that a person is supposed to go to synagogue and to pray with a minyan. Now, and it's far superior to davening in your own home, biyechidus, right? However, what happens if the situation is that there's no minyan at the time that you absolutely need to daven, right? There's no minyan. You have no minyan because for whatever reason, the people of the town only daven at 10 o'clock. That's when they come together to daven the minyan chakras, and you have to get to work by 9, and so therefore you've got no choice. You have to daven on your own. The question is, should you daven on your own at home, or should you daven on your own in the synagogue? The halacha is that it is better to daven, to go to shul, even though you're davening biyechidus, but you're davening in a shul. There's a certain extra kedusha in the synagogue, right? So that you should daven over there in a shul, even though it's a private prayer. What does that tell me? That tells me that there's still something special about an individual davening inside a synagogue. So therefore, the rabbis are of the opinion that if you're selling it, in the case where it's a big city to a small city, you're diminishing the number of people that are praying there. That's true. But we don't concern ourselves with that because it was used prior for Kedusha and it's used now also for Kedusha. So the rabbis would say that is also going to bear out when it comes to selling it to an individual. He's still going to be praying inside a synagogue, which is a holy act. There's not going to be all the other things that will take place in a regular synagogue, like having a minyan with Kaddish and Baruch Hu and Kedusha. But nevertheless, it's not as if it's gone from being holy to being not holy. And so that's all we need to satisfy in order to go ahead with the sale. And so the rabbis are of the opinion they can still go ahead with the sale. Okay?
Rabbi,
Yes.
I remember we learned that a shul was sold to a rabbi
Yes,
for private use.
that's right.
So what's the story with that?
We're going to come to that. We're going to come to that in the Gemara.
Okay.
We'll come to that. Okay. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so I think that your example is not really a good example
Okay.
because the person who's going to shul and there's no minyan there, this shul has the status of a shul. That when there is a minyan there, there's a minyan there. Whereas this person's private place where he's davening in seclusion, it never has the status of a shul where there's a minyan there. There's no minyan ever.
So I would ask you, at what point would you say that the kedusha of this shul ceases to exist? Meaning, we're talking about the sale of an existing shul, so it has kedusha, right? And you're telling me, right, that because it was sold to this individual, does that mean at this point it loses the kedusha that it has as a synagogue? No, it doesn't lose the kedusha. It still remains kedusha. It still remains holy, still remains kodesh, and you cannot just do whatever you want in that synagogue, right? You have to still be respectful. I'll tell you, there are many places in the world, unfortunately, where the Jewish population migrated out from where it once was a very populated Jewish place, right? And so now these synagogues have become, what would I say, defunct, right? They're no longer in use, right? If I'm walking through the town and it's time for mincha, and I'm not going to make it anywhere else to daven mincha, should I just stay where I am to daven mincha in my Airbnb, or should I see if I can get into the synagogue of the town to pray? I would say that it's better, if you can, to get into that synagogue and pray, because there's a principle, kedusha eina zaza mimkema. Kedusha doesn't move from its place. Once something is holy, right, it remains holy. It remains holy, and the synagogue remains holy, even if it's not used, and even if it's not in use. And so therefore, I would say that the fact that this individual is still choosing to pray in it, right? And he hasn't converted into something else, which is not Kaddish. In which case, what would happen is you would be mafkia the kedusha. You would uproot the kedusha from there by transferring it onto something else, and then using the place for something that is not Kaddish. So long as he hasn't done that, I would say it's still a holy place.
I think there's a difference, because when the shuls become defunct, and you have a choice between davening in your hotel and davening in a place that used to be a shul, you would sooner go to the place that used to be a shul.
Right.
Whereas in this case, this guy made an active action to take it out of that role as a place that used to be a synagogue. By making it a private synagogue, he's eliminated he's greatly diminished the kedusha that was there, by him denying other people the ability to ever make it a synagogue again. He's taken an active action.
So the Chachamim are saying that you're accurate, you're correct in the way you're presenting the situation, but nevertheless it still retains kedusha. And the rabbi says, so since it does retain some kedusha and you're still using it for holy purposes, it is permissible, right? It's not saying that, at the first chance you should try and sell it to people who are going to use it for private synagogue. The question is whether you were allowed to. And the answer is that according to the Chacham, you are allowed to. According to Remeah, you're not allowed to. So let's just say that your opinion aligns with Remeah. You agree with Remeah, and that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. Remeah agrees with you. Remeah agrees with you. 100% Remeah agrees with you. The Chachamim disagree with Remeah.
Right. I guess that, just to boil it down to one sentence, it's a question: did the synagogue lose its status as a synagogue because of a passive action, whereas everybody moved out of the neighborhood and now become defunct, or an active action where the person decided, this is my own private place and nobody else comes in to make it a synagogue?
So I just want to point out that it seems to me from this Gemara that it's not a question of losing its kedusha, it's a question of its having its kedusha diminished, the degree of its kedusha diminished, right? So according to the Chachamim, according to Remeah, I'm sorry, you might be correct. And because if you look at the wording, right, when he's according to the Gemara over here, the view of Remeah is that when you make it from Rabbin to Yochid, Leka Kedusha, that's a very harsh, that Leka Kedusha. Oh, so no, well, one second. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, what does it mean, Leka Kedusha? It doesn't mean that there's no Kedusha, there's no sanctity at all. It just means she'ein oimrim davar shebekdusha bachas masara. So when it says that there's no Kedusha, right, it means that there's no davar shebekdusha for which you need to have 10 taking place over there. Okay, but nevertheless, the synagogue does retain a level, a degree of some degree of sanctity, even when sold to the individual. And Remeah says, therefore, because you cannot say a davar shebekdusha there anymore, it would not be allowed, and that would be in accordance with your view. But Chachamim disagreed with Rebbe Meir, and they said that no, it could still be sold.
But there's no halacha out of this particular Mishnah.
What do you mean? There's no halacha?
I mean, I don't see a letter next to what the rabbis have to say, or a letter next to what Rabbi Meir has to say. So it looks like it's a point that's unresolved based upon the Mishnah.
Right.
It may be resolved in the Gemara, but according to the Mishnah, there's nothing.
Right. It seems that we have a principle of, Yachid v'Rabim, Halacha k'Rabim. I'm just trying to remember, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there is a principle about how we rule when it's written here.
I agree with you.
In the Steinsaltz, it says over halacha, and they give an halacha on it.
What does it say?
Over halacha.
Yeah, but what is this? So what does he
כיצד מוכרים בית כנסת כאשר מוכרים אנשי כפר או בכרך שהיה תלוי בדעת יחיד? בית הכנסת יכולים למוכרו ממכר עולם, כדברי חכמים.
Right, no, that's the next Mishnah. That's not this Mishnah. That's the next.
Oh, it's the next one. So
next Mishnah. Okay, you know what? I I will try to look into this a little bit more, and get some more clarity about what the ruling is over here. Yeah,
No, I would agree with you that Rabim versus Yachid, you normally go with the Rabim.
right.
So I'm surprised that there's no letter next to, the Chachamim Omrim, the. So
Well,
maybe,
when it says Amrulai is plural, which means that it's the Chachamim, his colleague, all said to him.
So, but what I'm saying is that normally if it's a halacha, for example, with the Rambam, you'd have a small yud or a small aleph next to the statement that would indicate that that's what we normally go by as the halacha. Okay, and there is none at all next to any word in that Mishnah.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Okay, so for example, in the next Mishnah, there's a small aleph after, before the word chutz, okay, so that's an indication that there's some kind of a halacha involved with respect to this statement. Okay, there is nothing there in this Mishnah.
Okay.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying is that I'm surprised that there isn't something there that is an indication. So maybe we have to wait for the Gemara to tell us. So let's go with the Gemara.
All right. We're now up to the next Mishnah. So this section of the Gemara,
it's done.
Is finished. But I'm gonna try. I will try to revisit it. And maybe tomorrow or the next, or as soon as I can. I was a bit hectic today, but we'll see how we go. I will try to look into it. Okay. The next Mishnah is as follows: if the townspeople want to sell a synagogue, right? How do they do it? So Remeah says the only way you're allowed to sell a synagogue is if you stipulate in the sale that if we want to buy it back, we can buy it back. Okay, that's the only way. You cannot just sell it for good. You cannot make a contract which is a final sale, right? That's according to Remeah. Chachamim say no. You can sell it permanently and unconditionally. The only thing is there are 4 things that you should not allow the sale to take place for. In other words, if the people buying it want to buy it for any of these 4 purposes, you should not sell it to them. What are the 4 purposes? One is you're not allowed to sell it if it's going to be turned into a bathhouse. Another thing is if they're going to turn it into a tannery. Another thing is if they're going to turn it into a mikvah. And the final thing is lebeis hamayim. Lebeis hamayim can either mean a laundry or a urinal, right? For people to relieve themselves, not a full-on bathroom, but just to relieve themselves for number one instead of So two opinions as to what that actually means, whether it's a laundry or a urinal. So Rabbi Yehuda says, that's the view of the Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda says that what you can do is you can kind of, he gives a loophole over here where you sell it to the person to be used as a courtyard, and then once he's bought it, he does whatever he wants with it, right? In other words, because the restrictions here in this Mishnah are more about the seller than the buyer. The seller is not allowed to sell it for any of these four uses, but the buyer was saying, right? In other words, from the seller's perspective, if I'm selling it to this guy to use as a courtyard, what he ends up doing afterwards with it is not my business anymore once it's sold. I sold it to him for him to use it as a courtyard. He went off and did something else with it. That's his business. Yes. Mordechai.
Is the reason that that's not listing among the things you can't sell it for a house of worship for another religion, is it not listed because it's obvious, or because it's permissible? Because I'm thinking of like all the shuls in Brooklyn when the neighborhoods changed that were sold to churches.
It's not a simple matter. It's not a simple matter. Those sales of shuls, and I'm just hoping that in every case they went and they asked the Rav before they went ahead and they did whatever they wanted with it. I will say like this: possibly, when the trustees of the town built the synagogue, if they built it with a stipulation that they can sell it at a later stage for whatever they want, right? So then, if that's the case, maybe when the trustees at a later stage decide that they want to sell it, they could sell it even for something that's going to be used as not kedusha. And I would assume that if that's the case, the money, the kedusha of the synagogue then becomes transferred onto the money, and then the building, the bricks and the mortar of the building no longer retain that kedusha because it's being transferred onto the money. But that's when there's a stipulation, and you have what we mentioned before, the Shiva Tuvei Ya'ir, the seven trustees of the town. But other than that, I'm not sure. It's not simple to just go and sell it for anything you want. Okay. All right. I think we'll stop over here. I wish you all a wonderful day, and Be'ez Hashem, we will come back together tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi,
Good
for
day,
the
everybody.
discussions.
No problem.